Right now, in the very second it takes you to hear the sentence, your body is completely destroying and rebuilding millions of its own cells.
Millions of them, just in the time it takes to say it.
Yeah, so you are quite literally not the exact same physical person you were when you pressed play. You're this biological machine operating in a state of like constant, relentless motion.
And that invisible microscopic chaos is entirely purposeful. I mean, every single biochemical reaction happening inside you right now is keeping you from, well, collapsing into a disorganized pile of raw elements.
It's wild to think about. Anyway, welcome to our deep dive. Whether you are a medical student trying to survive your first year, or a young professional brushing up on clinical fundamentals, or just, an insanely curious self-taught learner, we have an incredible journey mapped out for you today.
We really do. We are pulling straight from Susanna Nelson Longabaker's phenomenal textbook.
Right. That's Mader's Understanding Human Anatomy and Physiology, the 9th edition.
Exactly. And our mission today is to trace the brilliant engineering of the human body, going all the way from the basic chemistry of a single cell up to complex organ systems, forensics, and human reproduction.
Which is a lot to cover.
It is, yeah. And it requires a massive shift in perspective to really grasp this material. We tend to view the human body as a collection of isolated parts, a heart here, a femur there.
Like parts in a bin.
Right. But to understand human biology, you have to look at the invisible conversations happening between those parts. They're always talking to each other.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can even talk about a heart or a bone, we have to look at the ground rules of how we actually study the body. The text emphasizes this strict distinction between anatomy and physiology.
Yes, very strict.
And I hear those terms thrown around together constantly, like almost interchangeably. But they are fundamentally different disciplines, aren't they?
They are completely distinct, yeah, but also intimately linked. Think of anatomy as the geographical map. It's the study of form and structure, like the what and the where.
Okay, so if I'm looking at a liver.
Right. If you are looking at the exact shape, weight, and location of the human liver, you're studying anatomy. Physiology, on the other hand, is the study of function. It's the how and the why.
So that would be looking at the chemical traffic moving through that liver.
Exactly. But the golden rule of medical science is that structure is inherently suited to its function. I mean, the form dictates the physiological reality.
Right, like a tool designed for a specific job.
Exactly. A heart has very specific one-way fibrous valves because its entire physiological purpose is to ensure blood only flows in a single direction. The anatomy makes the physiology possible.
And that structural map doesn't just, spontaneously appear. There is a deeply organized hierarchical architecture. From my reading, we start incredibly small, right, with basic atoms of carbon and oxygen.
We go way down to the atomic level, yeah.
And those combine to form molecules, which then build up into these massive macromolecules like your carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids.
Right. And those macromolecules then organize into organelles, which act as the internal machinery of a cell.
The gears.
Yeah, the tiny gears. Then cells group together to form tissues. Tissues layer together to form an organ. Organs cooperate in organ systems, and, well, all of those systems operating simultaneously give you the complete organism.
It really makes me think of building a skyscraper.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, like the atoms are your raw materials, right? The sand and clay. Then the macromolecules are the bricks you bake from that clay. The cells are the individual rooms built from those bricks. The organs are the entire floors, like the administrative suite or the cafeteria. And the organism is the complete towering skyscraper.
That architectural lens is incredibly useful, especially for a medical student or a clinician. Because understanding pathology, understanding why a patient is actually sick, requires knowing exactly which level of the building is compromised.
Right, where is the leak?
Exactly. If you have a massive leak on the 10th floor, you have to figure out if it's a macro problem with the structural layout of the plumbing system on that floor, or if a specific microscopic brick inside a single pipe is fundamentally defective. You have to trace the dysfunction down to its structural root.
Well, let's actually zoom down into one of those individual rooms, single human cell, and see how those bricks are functioning. The text breaks the cell down into a few main components, starting with the nucleus. That seems to be like the manager's office of our cellular room.
It is. The nucleus is the protected vault for your genetic information. It houses your DNA, which is the master biochemical blueprint.
And that dictates everything, right?
Every single metabolic function and physical structure the cell will ever produce, yes. The DNA strand is organized into specific segments called genes, and the exact chemical sequence of those genes determines your traits.
And the textbook has a really fascinating forensic focus on this. Because the chemical composition of each person's DNA sequence is uniquely patterned, it gives us the clinical ability to perform DNA fingerprinting.
Which is an amazing tool.
It blows my mind. You can leave behind a single skin cell at a crime scene, and that unique blueprint can be read.
Which is an incredible application of cellular anatomy.
Yeah.
But, inside the living body, that blueprint has to actually be constructed into something tangible. It can't just sit in the vault.
So how does it get out?
Well, the DNA sends chemical messages out of the nucleus and into the cytoplasm to a network called the endomembrane system.
Okay.
This consists of the endoplasmic reticulum, both rough and smooth, and the Golgi apparatus.
So if the nucleus is the manager's office handing out the blueprints, the endomembrane system is the factory floor.
It is a massive manufacturing and shipping department. The rough endoplasmic reticulum is actually studded with ribosomes.
Wait, those are the little protein builders.
Right, exactly. They physically link amino acids together to build proteins based on the DNA's instructions. Meanwhile, the smooth endoplasmic reticulum synthesizes lipids, right, fats. Then those raw products are sent to the Golgi apparatus, which modifies them, folds them into their final functional shapes, and packages them into tiny transport bubbles called vesicles.
But to get those vesicles out into the body or to bring nutrients in, you have to pass through the cell's outer boundary, the plasma membrane.
A gatekeeper, yeah.
And the textbook describes the structure of this boundary as the fluid mosaic model. And I have to push back on the word membrane for a second.
Why is that?
Well, when I hear that, I picture a static wall or maybe like the tight rubber skin of a balloon, but fluid mosaic implies something constantly moving. Is it more like a crowded swimming pool where the water is a layer of fats and there are floating pool rafts constantly bumping into each other?
What's fascinating here is that the swimming pool imagery perfectly captures the biochemical reality.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The plasma membrane is absolutely not a solid wall. The water in your analogy is the double layer of phospholipids. At normal body temperature, these fats literally have the consistency of light olive oil.
Whoa, olive oil.
Yeah, they are totally fluid. And the rafts floating in that oil are integral membrane proteins.
But why do we need floating protein rafts? What are they actually doing in the oil?
They are actively managing the security and supply lines of the cell. Some of these proteins function as open channels, like turnstiles, allowing specific ions like sodium or potassium to flow in and out.
Okay, so they're passive doors.
Some of them, yes. But others are active carriers that act like ferry boats. They physically bind to a large molecule like glucose, change their own shape, and drag the nutrient across the lipid layer into the cell.
So they're physically grabbing food and pulling it in?
Exactly. This active, highly selective management is vital. If the membrane were a static wall, the cell would either starve to death or drown in its own toxic metabolic waste.
So the cell is constantly monitoring what goes in and what goes out just to stay alive, but a single cell doesn't exist in a vacuum. You have trillions of these swimming pools packed together, and they all need specific temperatures and fuel.
Trillions of them, yeah.
Which brings us to the grand integrator of human biology, homeostasis.
Homeostasis is the relative constancy of the body's internal environment. And when we say internal environment, we're specifically talking about the blood and the interstitial fluid that bathes every single cell.
The water they swim in.
Right. The body works tirelessly to keep variables like temperature, blood pressure, and blood pH within a remarkably narrow, strict range.
And the text mentions the body manages this through negative and positive feedback loops. Negative feedback seems like a standard household thermostat, right? If your house gets too cold, the sensor notices, turns on the heater, and once the temperature is back to normal, the heater shuts off.
The stimulus is negated.
Exactly.
Negative feedback mechanisms are the heavy lifters of daily survival. They prevent small changes from becoming life-threatening extremes. Positive feedback, though, is fundamentally different and much rarer.
How so?
Well, instead of maintaining stability, positive feedback occurs when a biological process needs to be driven to a very definite, extreme cutoff point.
Which sounds incredibly dangerous. If it gets out of control, it just keeps escalating.
It does, which is exactly why it is reserved for specific events. Childbirth is the classic clinical example here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the baby's head pushes on the cervix, causing a nerve signal to the brain, which releases the hormone oxytocin. Oxytocin causes the uterine muscles to contract stronger, which pushes the head harder, which releases more oxytocin.
So it just feeds on itself.
Right, the cycle accelerates and escalates continuously until the definitive cutoff point is reached, which is the delivery of the baby. Once the stimulus is gone, the feedback loop breaks.
Okay, so to maintain this delicate homeostasis on a daily basis, the body relies on 11 distinct organ systems. But instead of just reading down the list of, the integumentary system and the digestive system, let's look at how they integrate. So what does this all mean in a real-world scenario?
I think let's hear it.
Imagine I am late for work and I suddenly have to sprint down the street to catch a moving bus. What is actually happening under the hood?
A tremendous cascade of integration. The moment you see the bus pulling away, your nervous system processes the visual threat. It immediately signals your endocrine system to dump adrenaline into your bloodstream.
My heart is racing just thinking about it.
Right, and then your muscular system instantly contracts your leg muscles so you can sprint. But muscle contraction requires massive amounts of oxygen and glucose. So your nervous system simultaneously tells your respiratory system to dilate your airways and breathe faster to pull in oxygen.
And that oxygen has to actually get to the leg muscles somehow.
Which is where the cardiovascular system takes over. It ramps up your heart rate to pump that freshly oxygenated blood down to your legs. And as your muscles burn that fuel, they generate heat.
So I start getting hot.
Exactly. To prevent your internal temperature from rising and literally destroying your cellular proteins, your cardiovascular system diverts warm blood to your skin, which is the integumentary system, and that produces sweat to cool you down via evaporation.
That is so deeply interconnected.
And quietly in the background, your urinary system is altering your kidney function to conserve water because you are losing it through sweat.
Every single system talking to every other system completely below my level of consciousness, just so I can catch a bus.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it proves that no system acts in isolation. The structural design of the body is optimized for this exact kind of physiological synergy.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. To ground this in some practical clinical anatomy, the text highlights the skeletal system. I think a lot of people, myself included, just view the skeleton as a coat rack.
A coat rack?
Yeah, like it's the hard, dead scaffolding that keeps us from collapsing into a puddle, and the muscles do all the actual work.
Oh, that is a very common misconception. The skeletal system is incredibly dynamic. Yes, it provides support and leverages movement, but it also protects soft organs, like your skull shielding your brain.
Right.
And inside the hollow cavities of your bones, the red bone marrow is highly active, constantly manufacturing all of your red and white blood cells.
Wow, okay. Let's look at that movement aspect, because the skeletal system doesn't move itself. It relies on the muscular system pulling on it. And the microscopic anatomy of a muscle shows exactly how that pulling force is transferred without ripping the tissue apart.
It's a brilliant design.
The text breaks down the layers. You have individual microscopic muscle fibers wrapped in a connective tissue called the endomysium. Those fibers are bundled into larger groups called fascicles wrapped in the perimysium, and the entire muscle is wrapped in a thick outer layer called the epimysium.
Those layers of connective tissue are essential. When a microscopic muscle fiber contracts, it generates a tiny amount of force. But because of those wrappings, that microscopic force is harnessed and transferred outward to the tendon, which pulls on the bone.
It's like looking at the cross-section of a high-voltage suspension cable on a bridge. You don't just have one giant piece of steel. You have thousands of tiny steel threads wrapped in wire, bundled into thicker ropes, wrapped in heavy rubber. The layered structure is what gives the cable its immense, unbreakable pulling strength.
The mechanical engineering is identical. And because bones endure these mechanical stresses over a lifetime, their physical structure adapts and changes, leaving a permanent record of our biology.
Which brings us to the focus on forensics section. This blew my mind. When law enforcement finds a skeletal remain like a John or Jane Doe, a forensic anthropologist can literally read the geography of the bones to determine who they belong to.
Forensic anthropology relies heavily on the fact that bone structure differs based on sex, age, and lifestyle. If an anthropologist examines a skull, they can look for very specific markers.
Like what?
Well, a female skull is generally smaller, more delicate, with rounded margins and a more pointed V-shaped chin. A male skull, on the other hand, tends to be bulkier, with pronounced heavy brow ridges, thicker bone density at muscle attachment sites, and a squared-off U-shaped chin.
That's amazing.
By analyzing the skull and the specific angles of the pelvic girdle, they can accurately determine the biological sex of the deceased.
So the bones are this hard-lasting forensic record. But while we are alive, they are actually serving as a metabolic bank vault, right? Can we trace how the skeletal system interacts with the cardiovascular system to keep us alive?
Oh, this is one of the most vital pathways in human physiology.
Mm-hmm.
Your bones store massive amounts of calcium. Calcium is what makes bone tissue hard. But crucially, dissolved calcium ions in your bloodstream are required for your nervous system to send electrical signals and for your muscular system to physically contract.
And that includes the heart.
That includes your heart muscle. If your heart doesn't have enough calcium, it cannot beat.
So what happens if I'm not eating enough calcium-rich foods? Does my heart just stop?
This is where homeostasis kicks in. If your blood calcium levels drop even slightly, the parathyroid gland detects it and releases a hormone into the blood.
Okay.
The cardiovascular system transports that hormone to your skeletal system. The hormone activates special bone-destroying cells called osteoclasts, which literally break down the hard matrix of your bone, releasing the stored calcium back into the bloodstream.
Right.
The skeletal system makes a withdrawal to keep the cardiovascular system functioning.
The skeletal system sacrifices its own structural density just to keep the heart beating and the nerves firing. That is incredible. Now, everything we've traced so far from the cell membrane up to the bones and blood has been entirely focused on the survival and maintenance of a single living individual.
Right, keeping you alive today.
But biology has an ultimate overriding goal, which is the continuation of the organism across generations.
And to understand how we pass that blueprint along, we have to zoom all the way back down to the cellular level. The human life cycle relies on two very different types of nuclear division: mitosis and meiosis.
Okay, let's define those. When we talk about growth or repairing a cut on your skin or even the constant rebuilding of cells we mentioned at the start of the show, we are talking about mitosis.
Yes, mostly mitosis.
Mitosis is a straightforward duplication. A parent cell divides to create two absolutely identical daughter cells. It keeps the chromosome number constant at what we call a diploid 46. That's 23 pairs of chromosomes.
Right. Mitosis ensures that the new skin cell functions exactly like the old skin cell. But meiosis is an entirely different, highly specialized process.
Where does that happen?
It occurs exclusively in the testes of males during spermatogenesis and in the ovaries of females during oogenesis to produce gametes, so the sperm and the ova. Meiosis involves 2 rounds of division, and its physiological mission is to have the chromosome number from a diploid 46 down to a haploid 23.
So what does this all mean for genetics? I like to think of mitosis like an office copy machine perfectly duplicating a 46-page technical manual. If a skin cell divides, the new cell gets the exact same manual, word for word.
Very true.
But meiosis isn't a copy machine, it's more like a genetic casino. Nature takes 2 completely different 46-page manuals, shuffles the pages wildly, cuts the stack exactly in half, and places an evolutionary bet on a brand new, unique 23-page manual.
The genetic casino analogy is excellent because the random assortment during meiosis guarantees that no 2 gametes are ever identical.
Never identical.
Never. This is the entire biological engine of human variation. When fertilization occurs, when the haploid sperm carrying its 23 chromosomes merges with the haploid ovum carrying its 23 chromosomes, they fuse to create a zygote. And that single-cell zygote now possesses the full, restored diploid number of 46 chromosomes.
From that moment of fusion, the casino closes. The genetic blueprint is set. And from that single cell, mitosis takes over, duplicating that specific blueprint billions of times to construct a human being.
Exactly.
And of course, the physical ability to produce those gametes relies on another systemic cascade, which is puberty.
Yes. At a certain stage of development, the endocrine system begins secreting sex hormones, testosterone in males, and estrogen and progesterone in females. These chemical messengers travel through the cardiovascular system, triggering massive anatomical changes that lead to sexual maturity.
This raises an important question about integration again. We often study human reproduction as its own separate chapter at the back of the textbook. But these reproductive organs can't function on their own, can they?
This raises an important question, yes. They are completely dependent on the host's other organ systems. Consider a developing fetus. It relies entirely on the maternal cardiovascular system to deliver oxygen and nutrients through the placenta.
Because it can't eat or breathe on its own.
Right, and to carry away its metabolic waste. The maternal skeletal system has to physically widen and adapt to carry the growing reproductive organs. The muscular system is required for the actual delivery.
You literally cannot separate one system from the whole without the entire skyscraper collapsing.
I think that is the most profound takeaway from studying anatomy and physiology. When we memorize lists of bones or memorize the names of cellular organelles, we risk missing the sheer brilliance of the machine.
We miss the forest for the trees.
Exactly. The true magic lies in those invisible, continuous conversations happening inside you every fraction of a second. The way a tiny drop in blood pH elutes your brainstem to immediately increase your respiratory rate, or how the simple act of a muscle contraction today relies on a precise amount of calcium that was banked away in your skeletal system a decade ago.
Form doesn't just follow function. Form and function are a continuous, living loop. And to make sure you are really absorbing the how and the why of this deep dive today, we have a clinical thinking exercise for you, pulled straight from the textbook's content checkup section.
I love this one.
Yeah, I want you to puzzle this out on your own based on the systemic pathways we've just explored. Here's the scenario. Imagine a patient who suffered a stroke, which caused a complete loss of function to his upper right limb. He cannot physically move his right arm.
Okay.
Over time, his doctors notice that he has developed significantly decreased bone density in that specific paralyzed arm, while his left arm remains totally normal. Based on what we've covered today about how the nervous, muscular, and skeletal systems work together to maintain homeostasis, why did his bone density drop?
It is a brilliant question to test your clinical reasoning. Think about the mechanical relationship between pulling muscles and adapting bones. And what happens to the internal calcium vault when the nervous system stops sending the electrical signal to move? Trace the dysfunction down to the root.
Think on that as you go about your day. We started this deep dive talking about modern skyscrapers, where every steel beam has a deliberate purpose. But remember, a human-made skyscraper is static. It just stands there and degrades.
That's true.
You, on the other hand, are a biological skyscraper that is constantly tearing itself down, rebuilding its cellular bricks, monitoring its internal temperature, and adapting to every physical stress, all while you are completely unaware of the millions of chemical calculations keeping you upright.
Keep exploring those invisible conversations. The deeper you look into the blueprint, the more magnificent the architecture becomes.